Good day all, I'm Edwin Greyling. This is my presentation project for the module ENV 833. The presentation title is Agroforestry, an African Perspective, with a specific focus on large-scale agroforestry and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. This leads us to the introduction. Defining agroforestry is not simply achieved, as agroforestry and its associated practices are defined by their spatial and temporal context. Suppose a general definition for agroforestry would then entail land use practices in which woody perennials are purposefully used and integrated with crops and/or animals in the same general area to facilitate ecological and economic interactions to the benefit of the land user or community. Agroforestry should be viewed in a context-specific manner, depending on social, economic, and environmental characteristics of an area. Developing regions throughout the world have the greatest potential to successfully implement agroforestry practices, as participatory research and the promise of an improved livelihood adds enthusiasm and commitment to achieving such shared goals. Large-scale agroforestry. In the last decade, the emergence of large-scale agroforestry systems have appeared throughout Africa. These systems entail the development and management of agroforestry projects through the professional governments, technical support, and funding of numerous investors. These investors often come in the form of companies. One such company is named Pentagramma. Companies such as Pentagramma implement large-scale agroforestry systems which rely on scientific monitoring techniques to evaluate production chain activity in order to make informed decisions. Despite some large-scale agroforestry success stories throughout Africa, we all know that the majority of the continent experiences food insecurity, declines in per capita income, and land and soil degradation as a result of climate change. Future climate change impacts are predicted to affect the agricultural resource base negatively throughout the African continent. Western agricultural practices are often applied in Africa, but have often shown to lead to soil erosion and loss of fertility, as single crop fields leave the soils bare and vulnerable to damage by heavy seasonal rainfall. Agroforestry in general has proven to provide numerous benefits to farmers, such as improved soil fertility and improved household resilience through the provisioning of additional agricultural products for home consumption and/or sale. Large-scale agroforestry practices in Africa are seen from a point of view that research coupled with community involvement can allow for cost-effective means to enhance food security and decrease land degradation, all whilst contributing to climate change mitigation. The adoption of large-scale forestry is still a relatively new concept. However, the benefits associated with large-scale agroforestry practices in Africa have shown to have vast potential. Large-scale agroforestry practices in Africa focus on factors often not included in traditional agroforestry practices, some of which include investment, effective monitoring systems, a sustainability-focused approach, and improved technologies. The figure below represents a large-scale agroforestry thought and input matrix which I created. It has numerous inputs as observed. Let's go into a bit more detail with it. It's related to the successful implementation of large-scale agroforestry programs in Africa. The matrix highlights influential factors to be considered for context-specific areas where large-scale agroforestry is to be implemented. The interaction between given factors and inputs by large-scale agroforestry can be evaluated to determine the most viable options in achieving goals such as improved livelihoods, climate change mitigation, and supportive enabling conditions for communities throughout Africa. Agroforestry and the Sustainable Development Goals. In my opinion, agroforestry contributes to most, if not all, of the SDGs, but for this section I've highlighted the 9 most relevant SDGs and their relationship to agroforestry. There's an ever-increasing interest in agroforestry for sustainable development because of the clear correlation between the SDGs and what agroforestry can afford to achieve these goals. Goal 1 relates to no poverty. Agroforestry expands productivity for communities throughout Africa. Goal 2, then zero hunger. One of the stipulations of Goal 2 is to ensure sustainable food production systems and implement resilient agricultural practices that increase productivity and production. Goal 3 relates to good health and well-being. Nutritional value of agroforestry products aids towards a diversified diet for communities throughout Africa. This goal is, however, targeted at infant malnutrition. Goal 5 relates to gender equality. Large-scale agroforestry projects often focus on gender equality. Goal 6, clean water and sanitation. Here, climate action through agroforestry allows for a reduction in climate extremes. Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. Agroforestry practices decrease the amount of young people not in education or that are unemployed. Goal 10 relates to reduced inequality. Large-scale agroforestry implements policy to empower lower-income earners. Goal 12 then relates to responsible consumption and production. Large-scale agroforestry practices emphasize sustainable intensification through conservation. Goal 13 of the SDGs is then climate action. Agroforestry practices allow for small-scale farmers to adapt to climate change. Let's now discuss the first case study. The first case study relates to smallholder fruit production in Kenya through large-scale investment. The most common fruits grown in Kenya are mango, avocado, and papaya. Whilst the Kenyan agricultural sector is large, only 1% of mangoes are exported. Half are sold on the local market and the other half consumed on the farm. Whilst the case study is fruit-orientated, vast amounts of timber planting occur by farmers instilling a tree planting culture throughout the nation. Large companies such as Coca-Cola and Del Monte have invested and applied monitoring projects to small-scale fruit market chains in Kenya. Positive government, NGO, and private sector interventions have boosted the fruit crop market domestically for export in Kenya. Since large-scale agroforestry practices and investments, a study found that the value of the average Kenyan crop contribution to income was lower than crop contribution to income of fruit crops, meaning that fruit crops were more valuable than the average Kenyan crop. Case study 2 then relates to farmer-managed natural regeneration of parklands in Niger. In the late 20th century, farmers across Niger began removing young trees because of uncertainty of ownership and the right to use them. NGOs have since implemented funded management tree repopulation rehabilitation plans. However, farmers are often discouraged from long-term agroforestry investment because of economic factors and policies that don't stipulate ownership. Whilst 4.8 million hectares have been rehabilitated, the initial scope of the project was much larger. It is clear that policy had a significantly inhibiting factor to play in preventing effective tree repopulation programs from materializing in Niger. This then leads us to the discussion. 2 case studies were presented, one of which had a positive outcome and another that highlighted pitfalls. The Kenyan fruit tree case study greatly contributed to numerous SDGs through effective monitoring programs, research, and investment by large-scale agroforestry projects. The Niger Parklands regeneration case study highlights where lack of prior research and fair policy implementation leads to large-scale agroforestry program failure. Where successful large-scale agroforestry is implemented correctly, the SDGs are achieved. Where large-scale agroforestry is implemented unsuccessfully, the SDGs are neglected. The potential for large-scale agroforestry has become apparent throughout Africa. This then brings us to the conclusion. In order to achieve the SDGs through large-scale agroforestry programs, companies and investors must conduct sufficient research and effectively implement monitoring and management practices. Whilst agroforestry has been contributing to the general well-being of numerous communities throughout Africa, large-scale agroforestry has only recently proven its capabilities. The expansion of large-scale agroforestry practices in Africa will improve education, skills development, and well-being through sustainable practices. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. Any questions are welcome.